The desert highway stretched endlessly before Jason's silver Mercedes, heat waves dancing across the asphalt like ghostly flames. He'd been driving for 3 hours straight, fleeing from a meeting that had gone catastrophically wrong in Las Vegas. His knuckles were white against the steering wheel, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. The briefcase on the passenger seat contained documents that could destroy powerful people, and those people knew exactly what he carried. Jason had always prided himself on reading situations before they exploded. 20 years as a courier for high-stakes clients had sharpened his instincts to a razor's edge. He delivered packages, asked no questions, and survived by staying invisible. But this time, he'd seen too much. The meeting at the Bellagio penthouse had revealed a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of government. When guns were drawn and bodies started dropping, Jason had grabbed the evidence and run. His phone buzzed constantly with blocked numbers. He'd thrown it out the window 40 miles back, watching it shatter against the concrete in his rearview mirror. They'd track him through every digital footprint, every credit card swipe, every traffic camera. His only chance was to reach the Mexican border, disappear into the chaos of Tijuana, and reinvent himself completely. He had cash, fake passports, and a contact who owed him a life debt, if he could just keep moving. The GPS had died 20 minutes ago, leaving him navigating by instinct and position of the sun. He'd taken a turn north that promised to shave 30 miles from his route, a dusty 2-lane road that cut through the most desolate part of the Mojave. Bad decision. The landscape here was biblical in its emptiness, nothing but sand, rocks, and the occasional skeleton of a dead tree. No gas stations, no rest stops, no witnesses. That's when he saw them. 6 figures standing across the road about half a mile ahead, spread out in a loose line like chess pieces arranged for checkmate. Even from this distance, Jason could see they weren't highway patrol or stranded motorists. They stood with the confidence of men who owned this stretch of nothing, who knew that anyone coming down this road had nowhere else to go. The sun glinted off something metallic in their hands. Weapons. Jason's mind calculated possibilities in the 3 seconds it took to close 200 yards. They'd been waiting specifically for him. The timing was too perfect. Someone in Vegas had anticipated his route, called ahead, and arranged this welcoming committee. Stopping meant capture or death. Turning around meant driving straight back into the arms of whoever had sent these men. The desert on either side was soft sand that would swallow his car in seconds. His foot pressed hard on the accelerator. The Mercedes engine responded with a throaty growl, the speedometer climbing from 60 to 70 to 80. The men ahead weren't moving, assuming fear or common sense would make him break. They didn't know him. They didn't understand that Jason had survived 2 decades in the deadliest business on earth by doing exactly what no one expected. At 90 miles per hour, he could see their faces now, hard men with prison tattoos and dead eyes. One of them raised a rifle, sunlight catching the scope. Another stepped forward with his hand raised, palm out in the universal signal to stop. Jason's hands tightened on the wheel. His heart hammered against his ribs, but his breathing stayed controlled. Every muscle in his body coiled like a spring ready to release. The distance closed to 100 yards, then 50. Someone fired a warning shot that sparked off the asphalt 10 feet ahead. Jason didn't flinch. The briefcase slid forward against the dashboard as he pushed the accelerator to the floor. The men's confidence cracked. He could see it in the way they glanced at each other, suddenly unsure. They'd expected him to stop. They'd expected obedience. They'd expected wrong. Jason Statham didn't stop. The world compressed into a tunnel of pure focus as Jason aimed the Mercedes at the narrowest gap between 2 men on the left side of their line. Every advanced driving course he'd ever taken flooded back. How to maintain control at high speed, how to use a vehicle as a weapon, how to survive when survival seemed impossible. The engine screamed as the speedometer touched 95. The men scattered like startled crows. 2 dove left, 3 scrambled right, and the 6th, the one with the rifle, stood frozen for a fatal half-second before throwing himself backward. Jason's front bumper missed him by inches, close enough that Jason saw the terror flood the man's eyes. Then he was through, the Mercedes fishtailing slightly as loose gravel sprayed from under the tires. Gunfire erupted behind him. The rear window exploded in a cascade of safety glass that filled the interior like deadly snow. Jason ducked instinctively, though he never lifted his foot from the accelerator. Bullets punched through the trunk with sounds like hammers striking metal. One round went through the headdress beside him, so close he felt the heat. Another took out the passenger side mirror in a shower of plastic and glass. He swerved hard right, then left, making himself an impossible target while maintaining motorist speed. The Mercedes wasn't designed for this kind of abuse, but German engineering held. The engine never faltered, the steering stayed responsive. Behind him, the men were scrambling for vehicles he couldn't see yet, but he knew they'd come. Men like that always had backup plans. The road curved sharply ahead, following the contour of a rocky hillside. Jason took the turn at 70, feeling the tires howl in protest, the whole car leaning so far he thought it might roll. But it held, and he accelerated out of the curve onto a straight stretch that disappeared into wavering heat mirages. His hands were steady now, his breathing controlled. The initial shock of violence had burned away, leaving only the cold calculation that had kept him alive all these years. He checked the rearview mirror. 2 pickup trucks were giving chase, big four-wheel drive monsters built for desert terrain. They were faster on this rough road than his luxury sedan, closing the gap with brutal efficiency. Men stood in the truck beds, bracing themselves against roll bars, weapons ready. They weren't trying for precision shots at this speed. They were just laying down suppressing fire, keeping him rattled. Another bullet struck the trunk, and Jason felt the car shudder. The fuel gauge caught his eye. 3/4 full. Enough to run for hours if they didn't puncture the tank. He did mental math on distances and speeds. The border was still 90 miles away. These trucks could run him down in 20. The road ahead forked. Left continued along the planned route, predictable, expected. Right veered into even rougher country, climbing into foothills studded with boulders and ravines. No sane person would take a Mercedes up that trail, which meant it was exactly what he had to do. Jason yanked the wheelwright so hard the car went up on 2 wheels for a terrifying moment before slamming back down. The suspension groaned, something underneath scraped against rock, but the car kept moving. The road, if you could call it that, was barely more than a hiking trail, rutted and scattered with stones that banged against the undercarriage like gunshots. The pickup trucks followed without hesitation. They were in their element now, the oversized tires chewing through obstacles that made Jason's Mercedes buck and shudder. The gap closed to 50 yards, then 30. In the mirror, Jason could see the shooters bracing for better shots. One man had a hunting rifle with a serious scope, taking his time to aim despite the bouncing ride. Jason saw the scope flash catch sunlight a split second before he swerved. The bullet took out what remained of his rear window, passing through the space where his head had been. The report echoed off the hillsides. They were getting better angles, more confident. In another minute, they'd have him. The trail climbed steeply, switching back and forth up the hillside. Jason attacked each curve with controlled fury, the Mercedes sliding through turns designed for hiking boots, not high-performance sedans. Rocks gouged the paint, scraped the doors, but he kept pushing. Behind him, the trucks were gaining on the straightaways but losing ground in the curves. Their bulk worked against them. Then Jason saw his chance. Ahead, the trail passed between 2 massive boulders barely wider than his car. The trucks were too wide. They'd have to slow down, maybe even stop. He floored it, the Mercedes shooting forward with one last surge of power. The side mirrors struck both boulders simultaneously, snapping off with cracks like breaking bones. But he was through. In the rearview mirror, the lead truck screeched to a halt, its driver realizing too late he couldn't fit. The second truck slammed into it from behind, the impact sending men sprawling. Dust billowed up in a massive cloud. Jason didn't wait to see more. He kept climbing, kept moving, kept surviving. But his relief was short-lived. The engine temperature gauge was climbing into the red. The brutal terrain and constant high speeds were killing his car. And somewhere ahead, the trail had to end, either in an escape route or a dead end that would become his grave. The Mercedes finally died at the crest of a ridge overlooking a valley that seemed to stretch to the edge of the world. Steam poured from under the hood in angry white plumes, the engine making sounds like a dying animal. Jason sat in the driver's seat for 5 seconds, breathing hard, assessing his situation with the cold pragmatism that had defined his career. Behind him, he could hear the distant sounds of his pursuers backing up, looking for another way around the boulders. He had 10 minutes, maybe 15. He grabbed a briefcase and abandoned the car, jogging into the rocks along the ridgeline. The afternoon sun was merciless, temperature well over 100 degrees. He had no water, no supplies, just the clothes on his back and documents that men were willing to kill for. His shirt was soaked with sweat before he'd gone 50 yards. But he kept moving, using the terrain for cover, staying low. The valley below was bisected by a dried riverbed, and following it was a dirt road that led to what looked like an old mining operation. Jason could see buildings in the distance, weathered structures that might have been abandoned for decades, or might still be in use. Where there were buildings, there might be vehicles. Where there were vehicles, there was hope. He started down the slope, half running, half sliding through loose scree that threatened to give way with every step. Behind him, engines roared back to life. They'd found their way through. Time was collapsing around him. Every second mattered. Every decision was life or death. The descent took 8 minutes that felt like hours. By the time Jason reached the valley floor, his legs were trembling from exertion, and his lungs burned like he'd inhaled fire. The buildings were closer now, a main structure that might have been a processing facility, surrounded by smaller shacks and what looked like living quarters. And parked outside was a truck. Old, battered, but with tires that held air. Jason approached carefully, watching for any sign of occupancy. The place had the feel of somewhere people had left behind, though recently. A generator hummed somewhere, meaning there was still power. A satellite dish pointed skyward from the main building's roof. Someone was maintaining this place, which meant someone might return at any moment. He was about to try the truck when a voice froze him in place. "That's far enough, friend." The accent was pure Texas. The tone was pure threat. Jason turned slowly, hands visible and empty. The man who'd spoken stood in the shadow of the main building's doorway, shotgun leveled at Jason's chest. He was in his 60s, weathered as the desert itself, with eyes that had seen too much to be surprised by anything. "I need that truck," Jason said simply. No lies, no elaborate story. The truth was all he had time for. "Men are coming to kill me. I'll pay you $20,000 to let me take it." He set the briefcase down carefully and opened it, revealing not just documents but the substantial cash reserves he grabbed during his escape. Insurance for exactly this kind of moment. The old man's eyes flicked to the money, then back to Jason's face. He didn't lower the shotgun. "What kind of trouble you bringing to my door?" Behind him, Jason could hear engines in the distance, getting closer. The pickup trucks had made it down the slope. 3 minutes, maybe less. "The kind that'll drive right past if you give me the truck," Jason said. "The kind that'll burn this whole place down if they find me here. I'm not asking for sanctuary, old man. I'm trying to leave before this becomes your problem too." The engines were louder now. Maybe 2 minutes. The old man studied Jason with eyes that had probably evaluated men's worth 1,000 times in his life. Whatever he saw must have passed some internal test, because he lowered the shotgun slightly. "That truck ain't worth 20,000. Barely worth 2. Which means you're either desperate or crazy, and desperate men do desperate things." He paused, listening to the approaching vehicles. "There's a key in the ignition. You got 1 minute to be gone before I start shooting at anybody who comes on my property, including you." Jason didn't wait for him to change his mind. He grabbed the briefcase and sprinted to the truck, an ancient Ford that had more rust than paint. The engine turned over on the third try, coughing to life with a sound like emphysema. He threw it in gear just as the pickup trucks appeared at the edge of the mining operation, dust trailing behind them like war banners. The old man stepped into full view, shotgun now raised again, and Jason understood the bargain that had just been struck. This wasn't mercy, it was territorial pride. The old man would give Jason his head start, then slow down the pursuers with the universal language of property rights and loaded weapons. It might by 30 seconds. It might by 3 minutes. Either way, it was more than Jason had a moment ago. He gunned the Ford toward a gap between buildings, heading for what looked like a service road on the far side of the valley. Behind him, he heard the shotgun boom twice, warning shots. Angry voices responded. More gunfire, this time with a higher crack of rifles. Jason didn't look back. The old man had made his choice. Now Jason had to make his count for something. The service road was barely visible, overgrown, and neglected, but it led away from the mining operation and deeper into the wilderness. The Ford bounced over rocks and potholes, the suspension shot, the steering loose, but it moved. That was enough. In the distance behind him, the gunfire continued for another minute, then stopped. The old man had either driven them off or been overrun. Jason pushed the thought away. Sentiment was a luxury he couldn't afford. He focused on the road ahead, on the weakening afternoon light, on the decreasing distance between himself and the border. The engine temperature gauge on the Ford was stuck at 0, probably broken, but he could feel heat radiating from under the hood. This truck wouldn't last much longer than the Mercedes had. The service road joined a slightly better dirt track after 2 miles. Jason turned south, toward Mexico, toward freedom, toward a future that existed only if he could stay ahead of the men who wanted him dead. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the desert in shades of orange and red that would have been beautiful under any other circumstances. To Jason, it just meant darkness was coming, and with darkness came new dangers and new possibilities. Then he saw the roadblock ahead, and his heart sank. Not men this time, an actual police checkpoint, complete with patrol cars and uniformed officers. Jason's mind raced through options. He couldn't run from actual cops without becoming a fugitive for real crimes. But if he stopped, he'd have to explain the bullet holes in his clothes, the briefcase full of classified documents, the fact that armed men were hunting him. There was no good choice. There was only what happened next. Jason took his foot off the accelerator, letting the Ford slow naturally as he approached the checkpoint. 3 patrol cars were positioned across the road, forming a barrier that left no room for passage. 4 officers stood waiting, hands resting casually on their duty belts in that universal posture of law enforcement assessing a potential threat. The setting sun behind them put their faces in shadow, making it impossible to read their expressions. Everything in Jason's training screamed at him to run, to spin the truck around and find another route. But he'd run from enough situations to know when running would only make things worse. Cops had radios, backup, and the entire machinery of the state behind them. They also had procedures, bureaucracy, and rules they had to follow. Those rules might be the opening he needed. He rolled to a stop 20 feet from the lead car and lowered the window, keeping both hands visible on the steering wheel. The closest officer approached with practiced caution, one hand still on his weapon. He was in his 40s, with a weathered face of someone who'd spent his career in the desert heat. His nameplate read Alvarez. "Afternoon," Alvarez said, his eyes already scanning the interior of the truck, noting the briefcase, Jason's disheveled appearance, the tension in his posture. "License and registration, please." It was a routine request delivered in a tone that suggested he expected anything but a routine response. Jason reached slowly for his wallet, producing a driver's license he knew would check out, one of several identity documents he maintained for exactly these situations. "The truck's borrowed," he said. "I broke down about 15 miles back. A local let me take this to get to the nearest town." Not quite a lie, not quite the truth. The art of survival lived in those gray spaces. Alvarez took the license but didn't look at it yet. His eyes were still on Jason, and Jason could see the calculations happening. The officer had noticed a bullet hole in Jason's shirt collar, mostly hidden but not completely. He'd noticed the way Jason kept glancing in the rearview mirror. He'd noticed everything that mattered. "You seem pretty anxious for someone who just had car trouble," Alvarez observed. He finally glanced at the license, then back at Jason's face, comparing the photo to reality. "You been in an accident, Mr. Walker." The name on the license was Thomas Walker, one of 3 solid identities Jason maintained. It would hold up to basic scrutiny, but nothing deeper. "Not exactly," Jason said, making a decision about how much truth to share. "I witnessed something I shouldn't have in Las Vegas. Some very dangerous people want to make sure I don't talk about it. They've been following me since this morning. They're the reason I'm in such a hurry to reach the border." He let that sink in, watching Alvarez's expression shift from suspicious to intrigued. Another officer approached, younger, harder, with a thin mustache and suspicious eyes. His nameplate read Torres, and he had the look of someone who saw criminals everywhere. "Check the truck," Torres ordered one of the other officers, "and get on the radio. See if there's any wants or warrants on this vehicle or this guy." Jason's jaw tightened, but he stayed calm. The truck would come back clean, probably stolen decades ago and never reported. His identity would check out on surface scans. But every minute here was a minute closer to the pickup trucks catching up. Every minute was a minute closer to violence that would engulf these officers who had no idea what was coming. "Officer Alvarez," Jason said quietly, focusing on the one who seemed more reasonable. "You seem like someone who's been doing this long enough to recognize real trouble when he sees it. I'm not a criminal. I'm a courier who saw something I shouldn't have. There are men coming down this road who will kill me and anyone standing between me and them. They've already shot at me multiple times today. I have proof of a conspiracy that involves people high enough up the chain that calling this in through regular channels will just get everyone killed." Torres laughed sharply. "Right. A conspiracy. Let me guess. It goes all the way to the top." His hand moved to his weapon in a way that suggested he'd already decided Jason was dangerous. "Why don't you step out of the vehicle nice and slow? We're going to sort this out at the station." Jason's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. Dust plumes on the horizon, still a few miles back but closing fast. Maybe 5 minutes. His muscles coiled, preparing for whatever came next. He could probably disarm Torres before the others reacted, use him as a shield, take one of the patrol cars. But that would make him a cop killer or a cop fighter at minimum, and then the entire state would hunt him. Some lines, once crossed, could never be uncrossed. "Alvarez," Jason said urgently, ignoring Torres entirely. "Look at me. Really look at me. Do I look like someone running from a crime I committed, or someone running for my life? Check that dust cloud coming up behind me. Those aren't more cops. They're not highway patrol. They are hired killers, and they'll be here in minutes." He carefully reached for the briefcase. "I have documents here that prove everything I'm saying. Evidence of money laundering, political corruption, and murder that reaches into the highest levels of. Hands where I can see them." Torres barked, his weapon now drawn and aimed at Jason's center mass. The other officers responded instantly, weapons coming up. The casual stopped transforming into a high-tension standoff in the space of a heartbeat. Jason froze, hands visible, breathing controlled. This was spiraling exactly how he'd feared. Alvarez held up one hand to his fellow officers without taking his eyes off Jason. "Hold on," he said quietly. Then, to Jason, "The dust cloud, I see it, but that doesn't prove anything except that someone else is using this road." He was trying to keep things calm, but Jason could see doubt creeping into his eyes. Doubt was good. Doubt meant thinking, and thinking might lead to belief. "When was the last time you saw 2 trucks running that fast on this back road?" Jason asked. "When was the last time you saw anyone using this road who wasn't running drugs or running from something? You know this territory, Alvarez. You know what normal looks like. Tell me that looks normal." The dust clouds were closer now, maybe 3 minutes out. Jason could imagine how this would play out. The trucks would arrive. There'd be confusion. Someone would claim Jason had stolen something or killed someone. There'd be demands and threats, and in the chaos, people would die. Good people, probably. People like Alvarez who were just doing their jobs and had stumbled into something far beyond their pay grade. "Torres," Alvarez said slowly, "get on the radio again. Call for backup, but also check for any reports of gunfire or vehicle pursuits in this area today. Any reports of stolen documents or missing persons from Las Vegas." He stepped closer to Jason, lowering his voice. "You've got about 2 minutes to convince me. Make them count." Jason spoke quickly, precisely, laying out the situation in the clipped sentences of someone who'd made a career delivering information efficiently. The meeting at the Bellagio, the documents detailing money flowing from foreign sources to domestic politicians, the shooting that started when someone realized Jason had seen the files, his flight through the desert, the men who tried to stop him on the road, the old man at the mining operation, everything that had led to this moment. Alvarez listened, his expression unreadable. Behind him, Torres was on the radio, his voice urgent now as he requested backup and additional information. The dust clouds were close enough now that Jason could hear engines. Maybe 90 seconds. The other officers were looking nervously between the approaching vehicles and their sergeant, waiting for orders. "If I'm lying," Jason finished, "then arrest me, take me in. But if I'm telling the truth, then those men will kill all of us to get these documents back. There's no middle ground here. Alvarez." You have to decide right now whether you believe me or not, because in about 60 seconds, the choice gets made for you. The pickup trucks roared into view, the same ones that had been chasing Jason all day. They didn't slow down at the sight of the police cars. They accelerated. Men stood in the truck beds, weapons visible. And in that moment, Alvarez's face changed. He'd seen enough gunfights, enough desert violence, enough bad men doing bad things to recognize exactly what was coming down that road. Take cover. Alvarez shouted to his officers, "Get behind the vehicles now." To Jason, he said just 2 words, "Go. Fast." Then he pushed Jason's truck door shut and raised his service weapon toward the approaching trucks. Jason didn't hesitate. He floored the accelerator, spinning the wheel, sending the Ford into a wild fishtail that carried him around the police blockade. Behind him, Alvarez was already firing warning shots, his voice booming command to stop. The other officers scattered for cover as the pickup trucks opened fire. The afternoon exploded into chaos, gunfire, shouting, engines roaring, bullets ricocheting off metal and stone. Jason drove away from it all, his heart pounding, knowing that good men were fighting his battle now. The guilt would come later. Right now, there was only the road ahead, the dying light of day, and the border that beckoned like salvation just beyond the horizon. Alvarez had given him a chance. Jason intended to make sure that sacrifice meant something. The sun was kissing the horizon when Jason finally saw the border, not the official crossing with its lights and checkpoints and scrutiny, but the wild desert where the line between nations was marked only by an occasional post and the determination of men willing to cross it. The Ford was running on fumes and willpower, its engine knocking with a rhythm that promised imminent death. Jason had pushed it for 30 miles since the checkpoint, taking back roads and trails that barely existed, avoiding anything that looked official. His side mirror showed nothing but empty desert behind him, but Jason knew better than to believe in safety. The shooting at the checkpoint would have gone out over every police radio in 3 counties. Alvarez and his officers had bought Jason time with their intervention, but that time was running out. By now, the men hunting him would have either escaped or talked their way past the scene. They'd be coming again, and they'd be furious. The briefcase sat on the passenger seat, its contents worth more than Jason's life many times over. Documents detailing billions in illegal transactions, names of senators and businessmen, proof of foreign interference in American politics. He'd spent his career not asking questions about what he carried, but this time ignorance wasn't possible. He'd seen too much, known too much, and that knowledge had turned him from an invisible courier into a target that powerful people needed eliminated. The fence appeared ahead, 12 feet of steel and wire marking the boundary. It looked insurmountable, but Jason had crossed borders before in desperate circumstances. He'd learned from smugglers and refugees and soldiers that every barrier was penetrable if you were willing to pay the price. The price was usually pain, sometimes blood, occasionally life itself. He abandoned the Ford 50 yards from the fence, taking only the briefcase. The truck had served its purpose, carried him farther than he'd had any right to expect. Now it sat dying in the desert, adding one more rusted corpse to the landscape of forgotten things. Jason approached the fence at a point where erosion had created a small depression underneath. Not enough for a person to fit through naturally, but with digging, with determination, with desperation, maybe enough. He used his hands and a flat rock, scooping sand and hard-packed earth, widening the gap. His fingers bled. Sweat poured down his face. Every sound made him freeze and listen for approaching vehicles. The sun was almost gone now, the desert transforming from furnace to freezer as night claimed its territory. Jason had no water, no food, no supplies for a night in this environment. He had to get through, get moving, get to his contact in Tijuana before his body gave out. The gap was almost wide enough when he heard engines again. Far off but approaching fast. They'd found him. Of course they had. There were only so many routes from the checkpoint to the border, and they'd split up to cover them all. Jason dug faster, his hands raw, the sand turning dark with his blood. The briefcase was going to be a problem, too bulky to fit through easily. But without it, everything he'd endured was meaningless. Headlights appeared in the distance, sweeping across the desert. Jason made a decision. He pushed the briefcase through first, shoving it under the fence with all his strength. It caught on the wire, tore open slightly, papers fluttering free. Jason cursed and grabbed them, stuffing them back in while simultaneously pulling himself under the fence. Steel scraped his back, tore his shirt, drew new lines of blood. But he kept moving, kept pulling, kept fighting for every inch. The vehicles were close now, maybe 200 yards out. Jason could see it was the same 2 pickup trucks from before, battered and bullet-pocked from the shootout at the checkpoint. They'd survived. They were persistent. They were professional. And they were about to catch him at the worst possible moment, half under a fence, exposed, defenseless. Jason kicked hard against the ground, using his legs for leverage. The fence scraped across his shoulders, his spine, his legs. Pain was distant, abstract, less important than movement. With a final desperate pull, he tumbled through to the Mexican side, rolling away from the fence and grabbing the briefcase. He ran immediately, not looking back, heading for a dry riverbed 20 yards away that would give him cover. The truck skidded to a stop at the fence. Doors slammed. Voices shouted in anger. Someone fired a weapon, but the bullet went wide. Shooting at night across distance was harder than it looked in movies. Jason kept running, using the failing light and rough terrain to his advantage. He had surprise now, distance, and most importantly, he had the border between them. But borders didn't stop bullets, and they definitely didn't stop determined men with resources. Jason heard metal screeching behind him. Someone was cutting through the fence with tools they brought. Of course they had tools. They prepared for this contingency. They prepared for everything except the possibility that Jason would keep moving, keep fighting, keep surviving no matter what they threw at him. He reached the riverbed and followed it west, toward the distant lights of a small town. His legs were heavy, his lungs burned, his vision swam with exhaustion. 20 hours of running, fighting, driving had pushed his body past its limits. He was operating on pure will now, the stubborn refusal to surrender that had defined his entire career. Behind him, the sounds of pursuit grew fainter. They were following, but the darkness and terrain were working against them. Jason used every trick he'd learned in 2 decades of dangerous work, varied his pace to confuse audio tracking, used rocks to mask his footprints, doubled back twice to throw off direction. The town lights grew closer, resolving into individual buildings, streets, the blessed complexity of civilization where one man could disappear into a crowd. Jason stumbled into the outskirts of the town as full darkness claimed the desert. His contact safe house was supposed to be here somewhere, a small blue building behind a mechanic's shop, password protected and stocked with new identities. If he could reach it, if his contact had kept their end of the bargain, if luck finally broke his direction instead of against him, he might actually survive this. The streets were narrow and mostly empty, the kind of border town that survived on through traffic and asking no questions. Jason moved through shadows, the briefcase clutched against his chest like a lifeline. Every passing car made him tense, every open door potential threat. Paranoia was keeping him alive. He found the mechanic's shop, Hernandez Auto Repair in faded letters, and circled to the rear. A small blue building sat behind it, exactly as described. No lights visible, no signs of occupancy. Jason approached the door and knocked 3 times, paused, knocked twice more. The prearranged signal. For 10 seconds, nothing happened. Then the door cracked open, and a woman's face appeared. "Maria?" Jason asked, using the contact name he'd been given. "You're late," she said in accented English. "And you look like hell. Get inside before someone sees you." She pulled the door open wider, and Jason stumbled through into a small room lit by a single lamp. The relief was so overwhelming he almost collapsed. "They're coming," he managed. "The men chasing me. They're not far behind." Maria locked the door and moved to a window, peering through a gap in the curtains. "How many?" 6, maybe 8. Professional. Well armed. They cut through the border fence. She cursed in Spanish, then moved to a closet and pulled out a backpack. New passport, money, phone with 1 secure contact loaded. "There's a truck out back. Keys are in it. You need to be gone in 5 minutes. There's a safe route to Mexico City mapped on the phone. From there, you disappear however you know how." Jason took the backpack with shaking hands. "The briefcase. Keep it or burn it. Your choice. But make it fast. My debt to you is paid now. Understand? After tonight, We never met." Maria's face was hard, her eyes shadowed with the same wariness that Jason knew marked his own features. They were both survivors in a world that chewed up and spit out anyone who hesitated. "Thank you," Jason said simply, "for keeping your word. Save the gratitude for when you're actually safe." She handed him a bottle of water and some painkillers. "You've got 3 minutes now. Go." Jason went, out the back door, into the small yard, to a dusty truck that started on the first turn of the key. He threw the briefcase and backpack onto the seat beside him and pulled out into the alley behind the buildings. Behind him, through the town's quiet streets, he could hear the distant sound of vehicles approaching. They'd tracked him this far. They'd probably track him farther. But Jason Statham had made it across the border. He had new identity documents, resources, and a head start. Most importantly, he still had the evidence that powerful people would kill to keep secret. That made him dangerous, which made him valuable. In the underworld economy of secrets and leverage, he'd just become a major player instead of a simple courier. The road ahead was long, uncertain, and probably filled with more danger than he'd face a day. But the road was open, the night was dark, and Jason had survived when every reasonable calculation said he shouldn't have. That counted for something. That counted for everything. As the lights of the border town faded behind him and the Mexican highway opened up ahead, Jason allowed himself the smallest smile. They'd blocked the road, but he hadn't stopped. They'd chased him across 100 miles of desert, but he'd stayed ahead. They'd thrown everything at him, and he was still breathing, still moving, still fighting. He'd deliver these documents to journalists who couldn't be bought, to investigators who still believed in justice, to people who would make sure the truth came out. Not for money this time, for something more important, for the principle that some things were worth risking everything to expose. The highway stretched before him, empty and dark, leading toward a future he'd build one careful step at a time. Behind him, the past burned like the sunset, beautiful and terrible and impossible to look at directly. But Jason had learned long ago that survival meant facing forward, never back. The men who tried to stop him would report their failure tonight. The people who'd hired those men would send others. The conspiracy would try to protect itself with more violence, more money, more pressure. But they'd made a critical mistake when they'd pushed Jason from invisible courier to active threat. They'd given him a reason to fight beyond mere survival. Jason checked the rearview mirror one last time, so nothing but darkness, and pressed the accelerator harder. The truck responded with a steady roar, carrying him deeper into Mexico, farther from his old life, closer to whatever came next. His hands had stopped shaking. His breathing had steadied. The panic and fear of the chase were fading, replaced by something colder and more focused. He'd been running all day. Now he was planning. Now he was thinking 3 moves ahead instead of 3 seconds. The hunter was becoming the hunter's worst nightmare, a witness who refused to die, a courier who'd opened the package, a man with nothing left to lose and everything to expose. In his pocket, the new phone buzzed with a message from the secure contact Maria had loaded. Just 2 words, "Stay alive." Jason smiled grimly at the simplicity of it. Stay alive. That had always been the entire plan, distilled to its essence. Everything else was just details, obstacles, challenges to overcome. He'd stay alive, and he'd make sure the truth did too. The road ahead was long, but Jason Statham had learned something important today. When men blocked the road, when the world said stop, when every logical outcome pointed to failure and death, there was always one option left. Don't stop. Never stop. Keep moving forward until you break through or break down trying. Today he'd broken through. Tomorrow he'd do it again. And the day after that, for as long as it took to finish what he'd started when he picked up that briefcase and ran. The desert gave way to hills, the hills to mountains, the mountains to the vast complexity of a country where man could disappear and reinvent himself completely. Jason drove through the night, leaving behind the violence and chaos of the day, carrying with him the seeds of a reckoning that would shake the powerful from their comfortable thrones. They'd blocked the road, but Jason Statham hadn't stopped. And now, neither would the truth.